port of Sinop, Ottoman Empire, November 30th, 1853. Admiral Osman Pasha involuntarily ducks as the shell screams overhead, feeling his insides vibrate as it detonates. Hot iron tears into the sails and decking of the frigate next to his flagship, while men scream for water, carrying buckets to put out the fires the shells have started. They're cut down by shrapnel from the next volley. He's heard about these guns. Cannons that fire explosive shells rather than the solid cannonballs his fleet is equipped with. Their use is still militarily controversial, but it seems the Russian Navy has clearly decided that they are the future, and Osman Pasha's fleet is the first to experience that future. Limping from a shrapnel wound in his foot, he orders his flagship to run aground so it will not sink. His fleet, much of the Empire's naval power, lies burning, and yet the Russians continue to fire. Thanks so much to Brilliant for helping us tell today's historic tale. When Tsar Nicholas I sent his troops across the Danube and into Ottoman territory, he was sure that the European nations wouldn't come to the Ottomans' defense. And honestly, he had good reason to believe that. Back in 1844, he'd personally met with the British government and signed a secret memo between the two, agreeing on a partition of the Ottoman Empire were it to fall. Because they were both alarmed by the French economic and colonial expansion into the Middle East, and he'd raised this agreement with the British in the days leading up to the outbreak of war. And the British didn't intervene, at first. While Britain and France had expressed private support to the Ottomans at the outset of the war, their first actions when the fighting started was to hold a conference between Britain, France, Prussia, and Austria to create a diplomatic solution acceptable to all parties. Now, this was how the Concert of Europe had been designed in the aftermath of the Napoleonic Wars, gathering to resolve disputes via diplomacy rather than combat. And while they debated, they insisted Russia could defend its territory, but take no aggressive actions. This time, however, the Concert of Europe failed. Ottoman Sultan Abdülmecid I rejected their initial peace proposal as too beneficial to Russia, and then when they rewrote it, Russia rejected it as too slanted toward the Ottomans. And truth be told, not all of these governments really wanted to broaden this conflict. For example, Britain's ruling party would rather the Ottomans defend themselves, and the Ottomans worried that if the French and British had to save them, it would open the door for these stronger allies to push them around as junior partners. But the Battle of Sinop changed all that. Not only had Russia taken the aggressive action the concert had forbid, its new dominance of the Black Sea was seen as a challenge to British and French naval power. Increasingly, Britain thought, or might be necessary to prop up the Ottomans, lest Russia consume it, upsetting the balance of power. And while Nicholas didn't see this coming, truth be told, he didn't fully grasp how Britain functioned. As an autocrat who never bothered studying other governments, he didn't get the role opposition parties and public opinion could play in shifting policy. To him, he'd spoken with the British royals and their political leaders, set out a mutual plan, and that was going to be it, right? But what he underestimated most of all was the free press, which revealed itself as a far more potent weapon than the explosive shells used at Sinop. British and French newspapers cast the Russian victory at Sinop as a massacre, quoting a British witness who claimed that the Russian fleet continued to fire, even when the Ottoman ships could no longer fire back. Though this was a pretty common practice in naval warfare, the virulently Russophobic British press, already known for printing conspiracy theories about Russian plans to dominate Europe, made it a celebrated cause. And of course, Sinop was exactly the kind of aggressive action Russia had been warned against. Public opinion swung toward the war party in Parliament, and after Russia ignored a British and French ultimatum to withdraw from Ottoman territory, the two declared war on March 28, 1854. Again, the press was decisive. In previous wars, recruiters would have to entice men to enlist by offering upfront bonuses, but now newspapers largely did the work of whipping up nationalistic fervor and trumpeting the glories to be found on the battlefield. Yeah. So across the UK, young men flocked to sign up for adventure, leaving their villages and cities in smart uniforms and singing lighthearted songs. However, the Royal Navy was already engaged in the conflict. Before joining the war, the British and French fleets had moved into Turkish waters and then the Black Sea in order to serve as a deterrent. But it was in the Baltic Sea that they struck the first blow. A massive Anglo-French fleet hit the Baltic in April, and within days was in sight of the Russian capital of St. Petersburg. However, after trying the fortress protecting it and finding its defenses too formidable, the fleet decided instead to destroy the smaller fortresses and ports around the Baltic. burning supplies and threatening the capital, so Russia was forced to retain a large army in the area rather than sending it south. The Russian Baltic fleet, terrified of this larger force, mostly huddled around the shore batteries near St. Petersburg, relying instead on their new invention of sea mines to damage their enemies. Now, it's important to remember that this campaign effectively won the war. The Allies had bottled up Russia's Baltic fleet, tied down huge numbers of troops, and instituted an economic blockade that would, more than anything, force the Russians to eventually sue for peace. And better still, they'd done it with few casualties on either side. So they were considered heroes, right? Oh, they weren't? Oh man. In fact, the British press printed scathing articles that mocked the Allied commanders and accused them of cowardice for not attacking St. Petersburg. And this lack of major battles ensured that the Baltic campaign would go largely unremembered, while the less strategically vital battles on the Black Sea would become enshrined in stories and poems due to the heroic amounts of bloodshed. Yet at the same time, the most consequential land battle of the war was going on, and the public largely didn't know it. In May of 1854, Russian forces drove south toward Constantinople. Knowing that the Allies were on their way, but had not yet deployed in force, they aimed to take the Ottoman capital and bring the war to a speedy conclusion. But in their way was the Ottoman fortress of Silistra in what is now Bulgaria. With the French and British still marshalling their forces, unable to help, a force that eventually numbered 90,000 Russians besieged the 15,000 Ottoman soldiers in the fortress. The garrison were mostly Egyptians and Albanians, supported by a half-dozen British advisors that took command when the Ottoman general was killed by a shell, his blood splattering the prayer mat where he'd been making his devotions. For a month and a half, the Russian army pounded Silistra. Inside, it was hell. But from a bluff, largely outside the line of fire, a young Russian artilleryman watched. June 21st, 1854, just outside Silistra. The artilleryman looks on enthralled as the faraway men kill each other. A young count, he had gambled away his fortune and joined the army to avoid his creditors. And while he enjoyed the action of military life, he thought that perhaps writing was the path for him. That's what he mostly does at Silistra anyway. Stands on the bluffs, watching the battle, reflecting how strangely entertaining it is, and how oddly beautiful the night becomes, as shells burst and cannons stab orange into the darkness. His name is Leo Tolstoy, and his impressions of this war will bring him unprecedented literary success, and create one of the greatest novels of all time. However now, here, he's thinking of battle. Soon, they will storm the fortress in their final attack. Oh, what will he witness? Will he live? And if so, how will he describe it in his letters? Suddenly, their officer shouts, "He has new orders. Limber up the guns. We're marching back north." But why? Why now? Tolstoy asks. Aren't they finally about to win? It's an order directly from Tsar Nicholas. Turns out, Austria has ceased its neutrality and massed 250,000 troops along their border. They intend to rush into the Russian-occupied Balkans and Danube region, pushing the Tsarist forces out unless the Russians leave peacefully. That territory will now be occupied by a joint Austrian-Ottoman force. Given that the British and French have landed 70,000 troops at Varna, the Russians can't win. So, to avoid them being trapped between two forces, the Tsar has pulled them out. The drive towards Constantinople has been cancelled, not by battle, but by maneuver and diplomatic threat. Tolstoy writes of his disappointment, but in truth, he need not fret for long. For he will see combat soon enough in the bloodiest theater of the conflict, a gory and grinding battle on a peninsula that will give the war its name, Crimea. You know, Zoe, there is a lot of info to unpack here, but that's part of the reason why I love working on extra history, you know? Because it helps me with that lifelong goal I have of just trying to learn something today that I didn't know yesterday. And I don't think I'm alone in that. Something I absolutely love about this community is that so many of you are passionate lifelong learners like me. But then again, if you are also like me, you know how hard it is to find that time to better your brain. Luckily though, Brilliant was built for busy people, with bite-sized lessons from a whole catalog of courses in science, mathematics, and engineering that let you gradually master topics in around 15 minutes a day, starting you at the perfect skill level for you, and then tracking your progress as you go. And because Brilliant is interactive and, not gonna lie, actually a pretty good time to use, the information I learned, get this, sticks with me. I know, it's crazy. Case in point, since a larger and larger part of my job is making sense of the data in our YouTube channel's backend, I just finished their lesson in data analysis fundamentals, which was not only super helpful, but something I never thought I would say when I first became a cartoon on the internet. Whereas our studio director, Jeff, tells me he just tore through their courses on artificial neural networks because, as Mugatu once so eloquently said, that AI is so hot right now. So if you are a curious learner just getting started, or a seasoned pro that knows continual learning is essential for career success, you You really should check out Brilliant for yourself at brilliant.org/extra credits and sign up to try everything Brilliant has to offer for a full 30 days, absolutely free. And then if you like it as much as I do, the first 200 people that use our link will get 20% off when signing up for an annual premium subscription, which bonus helps our channel make the shows like the one you just watched possible. And that sounds pretty brilliant to me. I'm sorry, that was too much. I knew it the moment I said it. Still, please check out Brilliant. It's really awesome. What if I told you that Ahmed Ziad Turk, Angela Valenciana, Arclight Games, Casey Mustra, Dominic Valenciana, Joseph Blaine, Kuya Koi, and Skylar Holmes were all legendary patrons? I'm not kidding.